and in the end, such an unfair death. All these memories ate the girl from the inside. The majestic appearance of the palace amazed the imagination of everyone who looked at it. Our heroine was born the first princess of the kingdom and always lived for the sake of her brother, who would become king, her sister and parents, and most importantly for the sake of the people. Her parents convinced her not to go out into secular society, asked her to leave it to her brother and sister, and said that they wanted to protect the girl. In this way, she had no choice but to be glad that her family valued her so much. However, even so, she was still involved in political affairs and devoted her free time to studying magic, so she felt her life was rich and happy. However, happiness was not destined to last forever, and the usual life was shattered on the day when the Chariot Empire declared war. The people suffered. The second princess, Nicole, was taken hostage, and the royal family had no choice but to ask Lars, our heroine, to lend her enormous magical power, giving all of herself to her loved ones and the kingdom. The princess agreed without hesitation to go to the battlefield. The 𝗖ście flame flowed at her command, consuming everything it touched along the way. Even those who could no longer fight could not be left alive. Through the roar of the merciless element, screams were heard begging for mercy. The princess hesitated, but she had no choice. The battle must be ended at all costs, for the sake of her family, for the sake of the people, and for the sake of those who stood next to her on this battlefield. She had to step over herself, and eventually the fire consumed everything, leaving only smoldering embers and echoes of screams echoing in the memory. However, this was not enough to match the military might of the Chariot Empire, and all survivors were overtaken by the news that the Berry Kingdom had admitted defeat. Lars was captured, and the days ahead were pure hell. Once in prison, she could not believe her ears, because as she was informed, her imprisonment was a condition for Nicole's return to her homeland. Our heroine denied to the last that such a thing was possible. Her own parents could not sell her, and even because they did not want to wait long for the rescue of the second princess, the nightmare continued, because the emperor himself appeared before her, a beautiful man with silver hair and a look as cold as his heart. He intended to make the princess his toy, to which she responded with open irritation. The strong-hearted girl, even in such a situation, refused to betray her country, because no matter what, she is still the proud princess of the Berry Kingdom, and she had to pay for her pride. The days that endlessly stretched one after another merged into a continuous stream of pain and despair. The emperor visited Lars from time to time, never giving up his attempts to make her his mistress, but the girl was adamant. No matter how she was tortured, she did not lose her royal pride. The emperor was unable to influence her in any way. Tired of endless attempts, he did what was least expected of him. With his magic, he healed the wounded girl. The man suddenly declared that his proposal was sincere, but after all this torture, hardly anyone would believe him. Finally, he called the princess the same as himself, so he hoped that she would understand him, and sent her home. And so 10 years later, Lars returned to her homeland, where a new hell awaited her. It turned out that she alone was blamed, both for starting this war and for the further defeat. The family for whom she went through 10 years of suffering made her a scapegoat. Their mocking smiles, words, all their hatred for their sister, who sacrificed herself for them, became a new nightmare that overshadowed all the torture that our heroine had to go through. They never considered Edel's family. They only used her when and how they wanted. In the end, they declared that she was not the daughter of their father at all, but of his brother, whom the royal family hated to the core. In the end, everything was made out to look like the princess started a war just to show off her magical powers. They betrayed her, trampled on everything she treasured, leaving her to rot in prison and wait for her time. Only her servant, faithful to the very end, came to her to give her at least a little food. The desperate girl wanted to at least find out what had happened in the palace over all these years, because she did not want to die without knowing anything. The man, unable to help her in any way because of his position, told the princess everything he knew. Soon after this, they decided to execute 𝗧𝗴𝗀𝗵𝗁 for crimes that she did not even commit. The girl, who was just trying for the sake of her family, so happy just because she was appreciated what happened to her. Images from the past flashed before my eyes. She stepped over herself so many times, and all for the sake of the people who stuck a knife in her back. The angry crowd, blinded by false accusations, demanded only one thing: the death of the unfortunate girl. Having gone through all this torment, the princess found herself at the very bottom of the abyss of despair, from where there was no turning back. The arrogant glances of the royal family cut into the girl like a knife, There was nothing left in her gaze except one question: why did she, who gave everything for them, now have to die branded with the greatest evil? She was not destined to find the answer because the time had come and the sentence was carried out. Or rather, this was supposed to happen. Not understanding anything, Large looked around, trying to understand where she was and why she was still alive. The servants calmly went about their business as if nothing had happened, and the man she saw in the dungeon, why does he look younger? And not only him, the princess herself looked younger than during the war. One of the maids mentioned Nicole's recent birthday, which further confused our heroine. Having asked what year it was, Lars learned that she had found herself more than 10 years in the past. While she was in shock, the maids continued their daily conversations as if nothing had happened, as if all the horror that the princess had to endure did not exist at all. Trying to maintain composure, the girl decided to carry on the conversation, although it was difficult for her. And they were talking about a letter that said that they wanted to accept Princess Barry as Empress. Chariot. Lars was flooded with memories of what Nicole's wedding to the Emperor had led to. Unable to believe what was happening, she looked in the mirror again, seeing in the reflection her younger self, still without the scars of war and torture. Will she really have to suffer again an unwanted war, 10 years of imprisonment and torture, betrayal by those whom she considered the closest people, and in the end, such an unfair death? All these memories ate the girl from the inside. Did she really do anything to deserve this end? The distorted soul saw its former self in the mirror, wounded and devastated, unable to bear such a load. Lars, in hysterics, broke the first thing she came to, and for herself the princess decided only one thing: she would never be able to forgive all those who caused her so much pain. Not the people of the empire who tortured her for 10 long years, not her once beloved family who turned their backs on her. The girl stood silently, trying to collect her thoughts, while all the servants were frightened by her sudden behavior. Concerned guards burst into the room, ready to rush to the rescue at any moment, but Lars did not notice them. Consumed by pain and hatred, having finally calmed down, the heroine only said that she was simply having a hard time. She had a chance to change your personal nightmare, your life. Never again will she allow herself to be taken advantage of. At that moment, another maid entered the room with an important message. The king had called the whole family. Not understanding what was happening, she was only able to squeeze out a few broken phrases, but they were enough for Lars to understand the situation. Of course, she had already lived through this moment once, and it became a turning point in her life. The maid, having calmed down a little, conveyed to the princess the king's words, which she already knew. At the meeting, they would talk about a letter from the 𝗧𝗴𝗀 Empire. Determined to change her fate, our heroine agreed to come, but this time, she is no longer a sweet and naive girl, and she will no longer allow her so-called family to trample her life. The servant nearby knew exactly the whole truth about what was happening behind Lara's back. However, it is too early to reveal all the cards, and for now she will play along with everyone. After all, the letter didn't say that it was Nicole who should go, so why not take her place? Unlike the second princess, our heroine knew that this wedding was a trap to force Barry to capitulate in the war. She knew what consequences this union would lead to, which means she could influence further events for the better. No one will dare to falsely blame the girl for all the troubles anymore. If people want to see her as a villain, well, she will be one. And so the family meeting began, and just like the last time, the choice immediately fell on Nicole. It was she who everyone wanted to see as the empress. According to all the rules, the first princess should have been chosen, but the past Large simply supported her sister back then. She still sincerely considered Nicole to be her sweet little sister who deserved all the best, but now she understood that unlike the second princess whom everyone loved, Lars was just an empty place for everyone. The one who always worked harder than anyone else was simply thrown onto the battlefield, forced to give up everything to save Nicole for the sake of her family. The princess was willing to kill people, put herself in danger, and was ready to do anything, but in the end she was considered an unnecessary thing kept nearby only because she could be sold profitably. And while everyone was saying that Nicole should become the empress, Lars took the first step towards her new life by objecting to this. Of course, everyone was worried, shouldn't she support her little sister? But our heroine did not even think of retreating. She stated that the second princess would certainly become a worthy empress, but her fiancé was known as a ruthless tyrant. There are countless people who were executed at his one word, and Nicole, who was raised in love, will probably be afraid of him. This man killed his own father with his own hands. Such a tender girl cannot be given to him. Our heroine knew from her own experience how dangerous this man was, but it was better to go to him than to stay with those who were ready to betray her at the first opportunity. Yes, he did not even treat his own subordinates with humanity, But even so, next to him, the chance to change everything is much higher than in a family of traitors. Continuing her speech, 𝗧 mentioned that the emperor, among other things, also has 6 concubines who are ready to kill each other for his favor. Nicole will have to endure such an attitude towards herself on a foreign land and alone. Is it possible to send her there? All these arguments gave the royal family pause, and 𝗧 continued to play the loving sister who cannot doom her sweet little sister to such torment. In the past, Nicole wanted to escape from the empire within a month. The conditions there were truly unbearable for such a little girl. Therefore, our heroine proposed her candidacy, and unlike Nicole, she was confident that she could handle everything herself. Continuing to act out her performance, the princess said that for the sake of her sister, she was ready to become a substitute. In the past, our heroine was really ready to give her life for Nicole until she saw that mocking smile. And while everyone was uttering hypocritical words of support, 𝗧 only thought that this time it would not be her who would be thrown out. And so after some time, the wedding took place. The neglect, indifference, loneliness that awaited 𝗧 in this marriage did not bother her at all compared to the war, where you had to step over yourself over and over again, burning countless people to the ground. This is nothing she had to go through too much in these 10 years, including her own death, so unfair and merciless. And now our heroine has a new goal. She will personally conquer Barry. Meanwhile, the ceremony was coming to an end. 2 cold eyes met to conclude this alliance without a drop of feelings. The rays of the setting sun illuminated the scene of the kiss of people as beautiful on the outside as they were cold on the inside. But let's digress for a moment and talk about magic, the flame of the Berry Kingdom, the healing power of the 𝗧𝗴𝗀 Empire. They were united by the fact that pure blood members of the ruling families are the most talented magicians, and our heroine was extraordinary, even compared to her family, which was one of the reasons why she was considered the heir of her uncle, and not the king. He possessed the most powerful magic in the kingdom, and the queen was once betrothed to him, but ended up choosing the first prince to become king and turn emperor. 𝗧𝗴𝗏𝗵𝗵 was the son of one of the 10 concubines of the first ruler and the owner of the most powerful magic in his family. Let's return to the ceremony. It ended with the fact that after saying a few sarcastic words, 𝗧 simply walked away, leaving 𝗧 alone. The only person the former princess, now empress, could really rely on was her servant 𝗀, the same man who told her about everything that happened in the empire during her imprisonment. It would have been wiser to take a maid with him, but as a sign of gratitude, the choice fell on him. It cannot be said that 𝗧 trusted him completely, but he was always on her side. The more the girl talked to him, the more it seemed to her that he was not a person at all. He always did his job unquestioningly, but could never establish communication with others. When all the people began to hate the princess, 𝗀 became her servant and helped as much as he could without any prejudice. And for this, 𝗧 was truly grateful to him, unlike the local maids who didn't pay attention even when called, causing all the work to fall on 𝗀's shoulders. Of course, this is much better than her life in a dungeon, but our heroine is no longer going to live a life in which she must endure. It's time to change this dismissive attitude. After asking for water, she prevented 𝗀 from doing all the work again. Instead, she grabbed one of the maids who had been ignoring her until now, which she clearly did not expect. 𝗧, lighting a flame in her hand, asked who gave the order to ignore her. Frightened for her life, the maid immediately revealed that it was all the work of the senior maid, after which she ran to get a glass of water for our heroine. The empress, having received the glass, immediately poured it on the girl, but only so that she could lie that she had not said anything, for which she was punished. Realizing the situation, the grateful maid hurried away. Meanwhile, 𝗧 was thinking about this order. If she had been her former self, she would have even been a little hurt by such an attitude, but after everything she had experienced, it was a mere trifle. But this does not mean that such things should be allowed to happen. After interviewing the other maids, she was convinced that the order was indeed given to the senior maid, which means it's time to give her a warm welcome, because they clearly have something to talk about. But let's go back briefly to the past, namely Nicole, who tore a toy she didn't like into shreds and demanded a new one. Her brother, who refuses to study because it's boring for him, and our heroine, once diligent and full of kindness to everyone. The key word is once. After all, while she was destroying the room, there was only one thought in her head: being broken is always so exciting. The heated was shocked by what she saw, but 𝗧 only asked why no one comes to do the cleaning. Not knowing what to do, the woman simply stood silently in the midst of the chaos, and our heroine continued her performance, playing the unfortunate cutie who was so lonely all these days. The head maid responded by saying that she had nothing to do with it, and if this was her order, shouldn't 𝗧 have realized her power and sat quietly, having received nothing in response. The woman went completely wild, showering the empress with her disdain, and at some point she finally crossed the line, causing Lars to lose her temper, which means now it's our heroine's turn to show who has power here and who is just a servant. There is no longer any need to hide your intentions in front of this woman, who was not aware of her situation. Not expecting a rebuff, the head maid was seriously frightened, but she still knew what awaited her next. After all, Lars decided to clearly explain to her that she was not going to tolerate such an attitude. One after another, the words came out of her mouth, clearly making it clear that even if something happened, the emperor would not care about some maid. After which she took the scissors. Of course, when the woman saw this, she was horrified, and Lars just said that since this was the first time, she would limit herself to hair. Despite all the requests to stop, the empress of course began to punish, and of course did not stop when she injured the maid's cheek, because she was struggling. And again screams, but not on the battlefield, but from a woman who dared to go against our heroine. So much screaming over such a trifle. Lars again began to remember the years of torture, which only angered her even more. The maid, in tears, asked to stop, said that she would order the room to be cleaned, that she would admit her guilt. But this was no longer important, unfortunately, for the woman. Lars is no longer the sweet and kind girl she was in her previous life. The next morning, the whole room was sparkling clean, having been cleaned overnight by the headmaid alone. Our heroine, as if nothing had happened, enjoyed a cup of aromatic tea, expressing serenity with her entire appearance. And rumors were already circulating around the palace about the princess, who in her homeland was known as a villain, and who was now abusing the maids. According to these rumors, Lars deposed her brother Eric, the heir to the throne, constantly raised taxes and held parties. She threatened the king more than once, rewrote the entire law, planned her country's trade routes so that the allies would attack ships. In the eyes of the people, our heroine was the embodiment of evil, a gloomy puppeteer who plays with people, destroying destinies for the sake of fun. Moreover, unlike the royal family, her hair was not golden but black, and she was eventually nicknamed the Bat Princess. Meanwhile, news of what happened to the heated reached 𝗧𝗴𝗏, but as expected, he was indifferent. Lars was equally indifferent now. She was not worried at all about rumors or maids, because she had received an invitation to a tea party and was wondering whether to go. Sudden anger enveloped the heroine when she realized who exactly sent the invitation: the fourth concubine, 𝗖cie, Annette, who in her past life regularly came to the dungeon to mock Lars. She and her retinue tortured the poor girl over and over again. Their words were not comparable to the wound from the sword, but they hurt the pride of the princess, who at that time was still loyal to the kingdom. Even when Lars was deprived of her sight, she and the whole crowd looked at the heroine like a beast and grinned at her. However, the anger quickly receded, leaving room for one simple desire, namely the desire for revenge. It was time for a tea party at which all the talk was about how terrible Lars is and how noble, on the contrary, 𝗖cie is. The empress, however, missed this chatter and appeared a little later, carefully hiding her hostility towards everyone present here. No matter how hard 𝗧𝗏 tried to portray a warm welcome, the wounds left by her words were still fresh in her memory. Among all these people, there was only one girl who had treated Lars kindly in the past, but apparently she was not present at the tea party. But there were all those who were eager to mock the Bat Princess from Barry. 𝗧𝗏 started talking about our heroine's hair different from the golden locks of the royal family, without even hinting but directly calling her an illegitimate child. But Lars didn't care about their words. On the contrary, she saw an opportunity in them. After all, she is the legal wife of the emperor, unlike the others, which means that if they have children, then they will definitely be illegitimate children who will become a disgrace to the family. There will be a huge number of rumors around them, and in their veins there will be only half royal blood, which is why they are unlikely to be loved by their own father. Not expecting to hear this, 𝗧𝗏 lost her temper, while our heroine just smiled sweetly and clearly enjoyed what was happening. But the time for a meal with the emperor was approaching, which Lars did not forget to mention to emphasize their closeness. Before leaving this den of snakes, having finally thrown a couple of sarcastic phrases, she left, leaving after this tea party in high spirits, unlike the fourth concubine, who was seriously offended by such words and behavior. Now she saw in the empress not just her rival but her sworn enemy. Lars stuck tightly in her head, causing her to become more and more inflamed. 𝗧𝗏 recalled how close she was with the emperor once. However, he had cooled off lately just as Lars showed up. As a result, the girl firmly decided to achieve the expulsion of the empress from the palace at any cost. It couldn't be that His Majesty really had feelings for her. Noticing workers nearby who were painting the walls, 𝗧𝗏 immediately came up with A way to annoy our heroine. Meanwhile, Lars was praying before the joint meal. The emperor needs this marriage to get a hostage from Barry, which means that in order to avoid another imprisonment, he needs to prove his worth to him. Luckily, Lars has more than enough information to draw on an offer. While she was preparing for the meeting, the empress received a message, supposedly from the emperor, but immediately realized that this was a trick because he had no need to write to her. However, any trick can be turned to your advantage, which Lars decided to take advantage of. There was no one at the place indicated in the message, and while the heroine was trying to understand what exactly her ill-wishers were up to, she was doused with paint and 𝗧𝗴𝗍 again. Who else could it be? Lars simply silently looked at the offenders, but not at all from shock. She simply has no need to waste her time on such trifles. The emperor saw everything that happened, but of course he did not interfere, and he left before he could find the heroine. Not only not saddened by what happened, but even joyful. Zefin waited for his wife for a long time, and despite all his insensitivity, never touched the food. But his patience does not last forever, and besides, he did not understand the situation at all and decided that Lars was just a weakling who was probably now locked in the room and sobbing. However, right before he left the room, his wife appeared in front of him, shocking him with her new appearance. In a previous life, after going through the same thing, Nicole threw a tantrum. Tired of being treated like nothing, she simply couldn't stand it. This is not surprising because the very young girl was bullied by everyone around her. As a result, unable to bear it any longer, she wrote a letter in which she complained about the injustice happening to her in the hope that her sister would come and solve all her problems. But let's return to the present, where the meal has already begun. The heroine simply silently looked at her husband, waiting for his reaction. Her hair, once the color of the night sky, now shimmered gold. Even a person like Zefin was surprised by what he saw. In fact, black was never her natural color. Her parents forced her to wear makeup, supposedly to protect her from those who might covet her magical abilities. Lars continued to dye her hair, just to avoid unnecessary fuss, but now there was no need for it. Golden or silver hair was a symbol of royal blood and an indicator of outstanding magical abilities, and the heroine's family, under the guise of concern, forced Lars to hide this color in order to destroy her reputation. Just the reflection of gold in her hair already showed what she was worth. Meanwhile, the emperor still could not hide a surprise. In an attempt to calm down, he emptied his glass without even touching his food. The lack of understanding of what was happening put a lot of pressure on his nerves. Trying to find a logical explanation for the situation, he assumed that Lars had dyed her hair gold. However, she denied these words, saying that this was her natural color, and she had to hide it because of family rules. The emperor began to ask about the reasons for the emergence of such rules, to which Lars replied that for the sake of her brother and sister, who were less gifted in magic. After all, if people find out that in the royal family there is someone stronger than the heir to the throne in their eyes, he will be weak, and Nicole in turn had a less pure shade which could affect her reputation in secular society. And the emperor continued his questioning. He didn't understand. Isn't it better to make the one who is stronger the heir in order not to reveal the fact that she was simply taken advantage of? Our heroine decided to answer these questions, evasively pretending that everything was actually logical. In the end, she simply changed the topic, focusing on how she and Zefin suited each other. However, the emperor was as cold as always and said that there are enough women in the palace who are of much greater value, and our heroine is just a political tool. But Lars was not going to agree to this so easily, because she is much more valuable than any of 𝗧's concubines. Such a statement seriously infuriated His Majesty, who did not want to recognize our heroine as a full-fledged empress. Before her, there were many women who tried to get close to him, and what happened to them? In the end, 𝗧 directly told the heroine that if she continued in the same spirit, death would await her. However, Lars was not bothered by his words, because she had information that would undoubtedly interest the emperor and make her truly valuable in his eyes. She uttered only one phrase, "White Meridian," and this was enough to interest 𝗧. After all, this is the name of a merchant ship on which the entire fate of the 𝗧𝗴𝗀 Empire depended. Its route skirted most of the continent, and for the empire located in the cold region, this ship was an indispensable way to extract resources, and Lars knew that in a month this ship would be attacked by the allies of the Barry Kingdom. The entire crew will be killed, and the goods will be stolen, putting the 𝗧𝗴𝗀 Empire at a severe disadvantage, while Barry and 𝗧𝗴𝗀 will receive unprecedented benefits. Lars tried to stop her father in a past life, because Nicole at that moment was Empress 𝗧𝗴𝗀, but no one began to listen to her because friendly relations with the empire were only a pretense. The princess was convinced that this was necessary for both 𝗵𝗵 and 𝗵𝗶𝗀𝗵𝗵. Besides, if everything goes smoothly, the empire won't even know who was behind everything. One by one, the king's words made Lars believe that the berries were doing the right thing and that it was for Nicole's sake first and foremost. As a result, all the blame was placed on the kingdom of Castle, where White Meridian stayed for the last time. The empire managed to recover all the losses, but it took a lot of time and effort. But the real culprits who made huge profits were never found. Therefore, our heroine decided to prevent this incident. She said that she knew the exact time and place of the attack, and the emperor, although he did not trust her words, was still interested in this information. Lars offered to check if she was right because she still had a lot of useful knowledge that could prove her worth. However, she did not reveal all her cards at once because her goal now was to intrigue 𝗧𝗴𝗀, and she managed to achieve her goal. The emperor became interested in our heroine, and now he could no longer harm her. Before she told everything she knew, he agreed to check the information about the attack on the ship and said that if Lars was right, he would recognize its value. The heroine only smiled in response. Confident that she was right, she didn't care about Zahn's words about what consequences awaited her if she lied. Although the emperor did not trust her, this was only for now, and sometime later rumors about what happened reached 𝗧𝗴𝗀. She appeared before the emperor with golden hair and also bargained with him. The fourth concubine, who already hated the empress, decided to make her regret it at all costs. Meanwhile, our heroine calmly enjoyed reading, gradually planning her further actions. A maid came into the room to deliver an urgent message. Lars reluctantly looked away from her thoughts. The letter turned out to be torn to shreds, and the maid said that it was like that originally. Putting the pieces together, the empress realized that the message was from her father. Not wanting to have anything to do with him, she simply brushed off the letter. Scraps of paper on which feigned words of tenderness and concern were written flew into the trash bin. Although this letter was not something important for Lars, she was not going to allow such an attitude towards herself, and she already guessed who broke it because the same thing happened to Nicole in the past. Our heroine decided to meet with the culprit, and in the near future, there was just a reason: a Christmas party at which all the concubines would be present. Lars, already anticipating her revenge, asked Shin to tell her that she would come too. The faithful servant, of course, went to carry out this order, and our heroine, thoroughly enjoying what was happening, decided to go for a walk. The greenhouse, which was more like an entire garden, was breathtaking. A huge room in which, despite the cold outside, it seemed like a separate world full of greenery and flowers. Lars happened to meet a young girl there drinking tea alone. Noticing our heroine, she jumped up in fear. She immediately recognized Lars as the empress, although she was surprised by the color of her hair. The heroine, full of calm, confirmed that she was indeed Jean's wife. The awkward girl immediately began to apologize for interfering with the walk. Lars finally realized who was in front of her: the third concubine of the emperor, 𝗧𝗴𝗀𝗵𝗵. Our heroine was wary of the girl because she was not sure who bullied her in a past life. After she was deprived of her sight, when asked why she was so nervous, even though she was elected emperor, 𝗧𝗴𝗀 replied that this was not so. She had no power, and she became a concubine only for the sake of establishing diplomatic relations. Deciding that she could get a lot of useful information from this girl, Lars invited her to have a cup of tea together, and so the drink and delicious desserts were served. 𝗧𝗴𝗀 sincerely admired the taste, or maybe she just played well. This was still unknown to our heroine. The conversation turned to sweets that would go with tea, and then the heroine realized that she had absolutely no understanding of either popular snacks or in general the latest fashion trends. Her family kept her away from society, and Lars simply could not know such things, despite the fact that her heart was covered with a layer of ice. After all the events she had experienced, our heroine was still embarrassed by such a situation. Noticing this, 𝗧𝗴𝗀 hastened to calm her down, and Lars changed the subject. She began to ask about the other concubines of the emperor, and her interlocutor was not at all opposed to sharing knowledge. Most of these girls were chasing the title of empress, but 𝗧𝗴𝗀 showed no interest in them. There have been cases where women have lost their lives trying to seduce him with their beauty, because he is only interested in those who have value, and the closest thing to this was a girl after whose appearance no one aspired to the title of empress. The sixth concubine, who got rid of everyone who came close to 𝗧𝗴𝗀, and Lars was worried that such a woman was still sitting quietly. Unlike 𝗧𝗴𝗀, the fourth concubine, in turn, is very jealous and generally hostile towards all the girls near the emperor. She plotted various schemes to become Jean's wife, and in comparison her group was one step ahead of the sixth concubine. 𝗧𝗴𝗀, however, escaped all these intrigues. She was simply not taken into account because of her appearance. She asked Lars to be careful, especially with 𝗧𝗴𝗀, in response to this, the empress directly asked why the girl was helping her. 𝗧𝗴𝗀 replied that she was already glad that she was allowed to live in the palace, and that she would not dare to go against the legitimate wife of the emperor. After all, she shouldn't have been in this palace in the first place. After a stream of self-deprecating statements, the Anne decided to help this girl at least a little, even if these were just words. The empress supported 𝗧𝗴𝗀, letting her know that she was better than she said about herself. In addition, the heroine finally remembered her voice, asking for forgiveness. The third concubine was the same person who sincerely apologized for everything that was happening and offered pain-killing wine. The only girl who at least somehow tried to help. Then Lars couldn't immediately believe her. She decided that the wine was poisoned because such a kind person couldn't be in such a place. In response to the rudeness, 𝗧𝗴𝗀 asked only one thing: to let her pray. For our heroine, as always, the girl, unfair to herself, sincerely tried to do at least something for her captive. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she, unable to change her fate, prayed for Lars. After 𝗧𝗴𝗀 left, the princess nevertheless decided to drink the remaining wine that had spilled on the floor. There was no poison in it.